A lonely truck driver gave a ride to an elderly beggar and his grandson on a rainy day. When he arrived at his destination, he looked at the back seat and froze when he saw what the old man was doing to the boy. The rain was hitting the truck's windshield with an insistence that seemed to want to wash away something more than the dirt from the road. Mike held the steering wheel with one hand, while the other rested on an old yellowed photograph that sat on the dashboard. The image showed a small boy with large, frightened eyes next to a thin woman with a tired smile. He didn't need to look at it to know every detail of that photo, every stain, every crease in the paper worn by time. That image had been haunting him for more than 30 years, like a memory that refused to turn to dust. The truck's engine rumbled low, almost like a lament, as he parked on the shoulder of a deserted road. The loneliness weighed inside the cabin like a physical presence, palpable, suffocating. Mike was 42, dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, face marked by the sun and the weariness of someone who had spent his entire life running from himself. His brown eyes carried an ancient sadness, the kind that doesn't heal with time, just settles in some corner of the soul. He looked out the window and saw only the darkness of night and the faint glow of distant streetlights. Why do I still keep this? He thought, squeezing the photo between trembling fingers. The sound of rain increased, and with it came the memories Mike tried to keep locked away. He was 8 years old when everything fell apart. The clearest memory was the smell of the hospital, that odor of disinfectant mixed with something sweet and sickening that he never managed to identify. His mother was lying in the white bed, so thin that she seemed like a shadow of herself. Cancer was consuming her from the inside out, slowly, cruelly. Mike remembered holding her hand so cold and fragile while she tried to smile at him. Her eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles, but even so she tried to appear strong. The machines around them beeped at a constant rhythm, as if marking each second she still had. A doctor came in and out of the room, always with that serious, controlled expression. Mike didn't understand the complicated words he used, but he understood the heavy silence that came afterward. His father was there too, sitting in a chair in the corner, his face buried in his hands. He seemed to have aged 10 years in just a few weeks. "Mom, are you going to get better?" Mike had asked, with the thin, frightened voice of a child who already knew the answer but refused to accept it. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she still had and whispered something he never forgot. "You need to be strong, my love. Take care of your father for me, okay?" she said, with a weak, slurred voice. Mike felt the tears in his eyes, but tried to hold them back because he didn't want his mother to see him cry. He was just a child, but in that moment, he was forced to grow up too quickly. The nurse entered the room and touched his father's shoulder, making a discreet sign. His father rose slowly as if every movement hurt, and approached the bed. He kissed his wife's forehead and stood there still, holding her hand. Mike felt a tightness in his chest so strong he could barely breathe. He wanted to scream, wanted to ask someone to do something, but no sound came from his throat. His mother slowly closed her eyes, and the beep of the machines changed to a continuous shrill sound. It was as if the entire world stopped spinning in that second. A doctor rushed in, followed by nurses, but Mike knew it was too late. "She's gone," said the doctor, lowering his head, and those words echoed in the boy's head like thunder that never stops rolling. The following days were a blur of unknown faces, tight embraces from people he barely knew, and words of consolation that consoled nothing. The funeral was held on a grey, cold day, with a heavy sky that seemed ready to collapse upon everyone there. Mike wore black clothes that weren't his, borrowed from a neighbor which were too big for his small body. He held his father's hand, but felt as if he were holding the hand of a stranger. The man beside him was no longer the father who played with him, who made him laugh, who told stories before bed. He was an empty shell, a broken man who could barely stand. During the ceremony, his father didn't shed a single tear. He stood there motionless, looking at the coffin with a distant expression, as if his soul had departed with his wife. Mike cried enough for both of them. When they lowered the coffin into the earth, he felt as if they were also burying a part of him. "Daddy, is Mummy coming back?" he had asked, knowing the answer was no, but needing to hear something, anything that would make it less real. His father didn't respond. He just squeezed his son's hand tightly, but his eyes remained empty. After the funeral, they returned home, and that's when everything truly got worse. The father started drinking. At first, it was only at night after dinner when he thought Mike was asleep. But soon it turned into all day long. The house that was once full of life and laughter transformed into a dark and silent place. Mike tried to cook what he could, tried to clean the house, tried to keep everything running, but he was just a child. He didn't know how to fix a broken man. The smell of alcohol took over every room, and empty bottles accumulated in the corners. His father stopped going to work, stopped shaving, stopped living. He spent his days sitting in the living room chair, staring at nothing, with a bottle in his hand. Sometimes he cried silently, and Mike didn't know what to do. He would approach slowly, touch his father's arm, but it was like touching a statue. "Dad, I'm hungry," Mike would say, hoping it would snap him out of his trance, but the answer was always the same, an empty look and a nod that meant nothing. Weeks turned into months, and the situation only worsened. The neighbors began to notice. An elderly lady who lived next door would bring food occasionally, looking at Mike with a pity he hated. A man from across the street offered help, but his father refused with a grunt. Mike was alone in a house full of ghosts. He went to school, but couldn't pay attention. Teachers noticed something was wrong, but did nothing beyond looking concerned. One night, when Mike had just turned 9, he woke up to a strange noise. It was the sound of the front door closing. He got out of bed, barefoot and shivering from cold, and went to the living room. The armchair was empty. His father's coat was no longer on the rack. Mike ran to the window and saw the silhouette of the man walking down the dark street with slumped shoulders and staggering steps. "Dad, where are you going?" he shouted, banging on the glass with his small hands, but the man didn't turn around. He simply continued walking until he disappeared into the darkness, as if he had never existed. He'll come back, Mike repeated to himself, trembling, but deep in his heart he already knew the truth. His father never came back. Mike stayed awake all night, sitting by the front door, waiting. When the sun rose, he was still there, his eyes red and dry from crying so much. The elderly neighbor found the boy like this and called the authorities. They took Mike to a shelter while they tried to locate his father or any close relative. They found no one. His father had simply disappeared like smoke carried away by the wind. Mike never understood how someone could do that. How a father could abandon his own son, leave him alone in the world after already losing his mother. Anger grew inside him like a poisonous seed. He grew up in shelters, went through temporary families until he was finally adopted by a middle-aged couple who had no children. They were good people, tried to give him love and structure. But Mike could never fully open up. He built walls around his heart, tall and thick, that no one could tear down. Anger transformed into hatred, and hatred into a wound that never healed. "If I ever find that coward, he will pay for everything he did to me," Mike swore to himself, and that promise became part of who he was. Years passed, and Mike became a man, but a lonely man. He chose to be a truck driver because he liked the idea of always being on the move, never putting down roots, never getting attached to anything or anyone. It was easier that way. He didn't have to deal with people, didn't have to explain his past, didn't have to pretend he was okay. The truck was his home, the road was his family. He had no friends, didn't date, didn't keep in touch with his adoptive family. They tried for years but eventually gave up. Mike was a ghost, passing through cities without leaving a trace. He worked, earned enough to survive and moved on. But moving on didn't mean forgetting. Every night when he stopped somewhere to rest, the memories came back. His mother's face in the hospital, his father disappearing into the darkness, the feeling of abandonment that never went away. Mike realized with bitter sadness that he had become exactly what he hated in his father, a lonely man, unable to connect with anyone, living an empty life. "I am just like him," he thought one night, and that thought hurt more than anything else. Now sitting in his truck, with the rain washing the world outside, Mike held that yellowed photograph and felt the weight of all the choices he had made. He was 42 years old and had nothing. No family, no love, no purpose beyond driving from one place to another. The anger was still there, dormant, but always ready to awaken. He looked at the boy's face in the photo, that frightened little boy who only wanted his mother to stay alive and his father not to leave. "I'm sorry, Mum. I couldn't take care of him. And now I have no one to take care of me, he said aloud, and his voice echoed in the empty cabin like a lament. He put the photo back in the dashboard and started the engine. The road was waiting for him as it always did, and he would move forward because it was the only thing he knew how to do. But that night, as he drove through the rain, Mike felt something different. A restlessness, a premonition that something was about to change. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Nothing will change. It never does, he muttered to himself, but still couldn't avoid looking in the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see someone there. The road was empty, as always. Just the rain, the darkness, and him. Mike tightened his grip on the steering wheel and accelerated, trying to escape the ghosts that haunted him. But ghosts don't stay behind when they live inside you. He passed a sign indicating the next town, but didn't even register the name. All towns were the same to him. They all had roads to enter and exit, and he never stayed long enough to meet anyone or create memories. It was safer that way. You can't lose what you never had. You can't be abandoned if you never let anyone in. That was the logic he had built to protect himself, but deep down he knew it was just a lie he told himself. The truth was that he was alone, not because he chose to be, but because he was afraid. Afraid to trust, afraid to love, afraid to lose again. It's easier to be alone, he said to the emptiness, but his voice sounded weak and unconvincing. The speedometer showed a constant speed as he continued down the wet road. The truck's lights cut through the darkness ahead, but no matter how much he drove, the darkness was always there, waiting. Mike thought about stopping at some station, having a coffee, maybe eating something, but he didn't feel like it. He hadn't felt like doing much lately. He lived on autopilot, making deliveries, receiving payment, moving on to the next. It was a mechanical existence, colorless, flavorless. He wondered if that was how his father had felt before leaving. If the pain had become so great that he simply couldn't take it anymore. Mike shook his head angrily. No, he was a coward. I'm different. I didn't run away from anything, he said firmly, but the words sounded false even to himself. He had run away. Run away from connections, from relationships, from anything that could hurt him again. He had spent his entire life running. The rain began to ease, soon turning into a light drizzle. Mike reduced his speed when he saw a sharp curve ahead. The road was slippery and dangerous, and he was in no hurry to get anywhere. He never was. As he took the curve, he saw something that caught his attention. Two silhouettes walking on the side of the road, completely soaked. One was an elderly man, hunched and slow, and the other was a child, small and fragile beside him. They had no umbrella, no protection at all, just walking in the rain as if they had nowhere to go. Mike felt a tightness in his chest. He could simply drive past, pretend he didn't see them, go on with his life as he always did. But something made him step on the brake. He stopped the truck a few meters ahead and sat there, hands on the wheel, debating with himself. It's not my problem. I can't help everyone, he thought, but the image of that child in the rain wouldn't leave his head. It was almost like looking at himself in the past. He sighed deeply and opened the truck door, feeling the light drizzle wet his face. The cold wind cut through his skin, but he barely noticed. Mike walked up to the two and saw that the old man had long white hair, an unkempt beard, and torn clothes that hung on his thin body. The boy beside him couldn't have been more than 10 or 12 years old, with large frightened eyes that reminded him too much of the yellowed photo on the truck's dashboard. "Need a ride?" Mike asked, and his voice came out softer than he intended. The old man looked at him with suspicion at first, but then his face opened into a tired smile. "You're an angel sent by God, sir." "We've been walking for hours," said the old man, his voice hoarse and weak. Mike felt something strange hearing that, a mixture of discomfort and compassion he wasn't used to feeling. He gestured for them to get into the truck and returned to the cabin, hearing the two climb in behind him. When he closed the door and looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the old man and the boy sitting in the back seat, soaked and shivering from the cold. The old man embraced the boy, trying to warm him. Mike turned on the heater and went back to driving, but his mind was elsewhere. He didn't know why he had stopped. He didn't know why he had offered help. He never did that. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was because in that child he saw himself. A lost, frightened boy, needing someone who wouldn't abandon him. "Where are you going?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. The old man coughed before answering. "Anywhere that will accept us, sir." "We don't have a certain destination," he said, and there was a deep sadness in those words. Mike tightened his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the lump in his throat tighten. "I know what that's like," he muttered, so quietly he wasn't sure if they heard. The road stretched ahead, wet and shining under the headlights. Mike didn't know it yet, but that decision to stop, that moment of compassion he had tried to smother for so long, was about to change everything. He looked once more in the rearview mirror and saw the old man taking something from his pocket. It was an old and yellowed photograph, very similar to the one he kept. The old man showed it to the boy and began to speak softly, but Mike could hear some words. "Look, this was my son when he was little," the old man said, his voice choked with emotion. Mike felt a chill run down his spine. He tried to focus on the road, but his eyes kept returning to the mirror, trying to get a better look at that photo. "I swore that if I ever found that coward, I would." The thought returned to his mind like an echo, but this time it was interrupted by something he didn't expect, the feeling that fate was playing a trick on him. Mike felt his heart race when he got a better look at the photograph the old man was holding. The faint light inside the truck didn't help much, but he strained to see through the rearview mirror, trying to capture every detail of that yellowed image. The boy in the photo wore a striped shirt that he knew too well. It was the same shirt he wore on the day of his mother's funeral, the same one the neighbor had lent him because he didn't have black clothes, the same messy haircut, the same frightened eyes, the same expression of someone who had just lost everything. Mike felt the steering wheel slip between his sweaty hands. That wasn't just any boy in the photograph. It was him. And if that was his photo, then that broken, soaked and trembling old man in the back seat wasn't just some beggar he had decided to help out of compassion. It was the man who had abandoned him. It was his father. "It can't be," Mike murmured, but his voice came out shaky and weak, betraying the shock that was taking over every fiber of his body. Mike's hands began to tremble uncontrollably on the steering wheel. He tried to control them, but it was impossible. Cold sweat ran down his forehead, along his temples, wetting his shirt collar. His heart was pounding hard, like a desperate drum that drowned out all other sounds. His breathing became short, rapid, as if the air inside the truck had run out. He looked in the rearview mirror again, and this time his eyes met the old man's face. He searched for something familiar in that face, marked by time and suffering. The white, dirty beard hid part of his features, but the eyes were the same. Those tired brown eyes he remembered seeing in the corner of the room, holding a bottle, lost in a sea of sadness. They were the eyes of a broken man, but they were his father's eyes. Mike felt bile rise in his throat. He wanted to vomit, scream, hit something, but his body was paralyzed, trapped between past and present. "No, no, no," he repeated softly, like a desperate mantra that couldn't push away reality. The old man continued talking to the boy, oblivious to the silent collapse happening in the front seat. He pointed to the photo with trembling, dirty fingers, telling some story that Mike couldn't process. The words reached his ears like a distant buzz, without meaning. All he could see was that photograph. All he could feel was the old anger returning with a force that frightened him. It was as if all the years of pain, abandonment, loneliness had been compressed into a fireball that now exploded inside his chest. He gripped the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white, his jaw locked, teeth grinding against each other. Mike tried to breathe deeply, tried to calm down, but it was useless. The wounded child he had locked deep in his soul was screaming, demanding to be heard, demanding justice. "Are you okay, sir?" the old man suddenly asked, and that hoarse and familiar voice was the final drop needed to break the dam. Mike stepped on the brake so hard that the truck skidded on the wet road before coming to a complete stop. The sound of tires singing on the asphalt echoed in the silent night. The old man and the boy were thrown forward by the impact, holding on as best they could. Mike turned off the engine with a sudden movement and turned completely backwards, facing the old man directly for the first time. The dim light from the dashboard illuminated his face, and he saw the exact moment when recognition also reached the old man's eyes. The old man's eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly. The photo slipped from his trembling hands and fell to the truck floor. The silence that settled was so heavy, It seemed solid, tangible, suffocating. Mike could see every wrinkle, every mark, every scar on the face of the man who had been his father. He was a shadow of what he used to be, but still it was him. "I know who you are," Mike shouted, and his voice came out torn, full of 30 years of pain that finally found words. The old man recoiled in his seat, as if he had taken a punch. His hands rose in a defensive gesture, and he began to tremble even more. The boy next to him looked from one to the other, confused and scared, not understanding what was happening. Mike got out of the driver's seat and abruptly opened the back door, the rain starting to fall hard again, immediately soaking him. He held the door open, pointing at the old man with a trembling finger, his face contorted into a mask of anger and pain. "You abandoned me," he shouted, and each word came out like a knife. "I was 8 years old. 8 years old, and you just left as if I meant nothing, as if I were trash you could throw away," Mike continued, and tears began to fall, mixed with the rain. He no longer cared about holding them back. He had waited his whole life for this moment, and now that it was here, nothing could stop him. "You left me alone when I needed you most. Mom had just died, and you abandoned me," he roared, punching the side of the truck with great force. The old man had tears running down his dirty face, his beard wet from the rain and from his own tears. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. He swallowed hard, wiped his face with trembling hands, and finally managed to articulate the words. "Mike, my son, he began, but his voice was so weak it could barely be heard over the sound of the rain. Mike stepped forward, his entire body trembling with emotion. "Don't call me son. You have no right to call me son," he shouted, and his voice echoed down the empty road. "Where's the father who promised to take care of me at my mother's funeral? Where's the man who should have protected me, loved me, stood by my side? You disappeared. Vanished like a coward and left me alone in the world," Mike continued, each word burning his throat. He felt as if he were vomiting years of accumulated pain, and he couldn't stop even if he wanted to. "I went to shelters. I went through strangers' homes. I grew up with no one because you weren't man enough to stay," he accused, pointing his finger at the old man with contempt. The old man lowered his head, shoulders curved under the weight of guilt. He took a deep breath as if gathering strength to speak, and when he raised his face again, his eyes were red and swollen. "You're right," he said, and his voice was laden with a sadness so deep it seemed to have roots in his very soul. "I was a coward. I was weak. I abandoned you when you needed me most, and that's something I carry with me every blessed day since then," he continued, his voice breaking. Mike felt a pang of something he didn't want to feel. It wasn't pity. It couldn't be pity. He had every right to be angry. "I was destroyed, Mike. When your mother died, I died with her. I didn't know how to live without her. I didn't know how to be a father alone. I fell into such a deep hole that I thought I would never get out," the old man explained, the words coming out in sobs. Mike shook his head angrily, refusing to accept that as an excuse. "Everyone suffers. Everyone loses people." "That didn't give you the right to abandon me," he retorted, his voice still loud but beginning to fail. The old man nodded, agreeing without resistance. "You are absolutely right. Nothing justifies what I did." "Nothing," he admitted, and the sincerity in those words was undeniable. "I drank until I couldn't feel anything anymore. I tried to kill myself, Mike, several times. But I was too much of a coward even for that," he confessed, and those words fell like stones in the silence. Mike felt the ground move beneath his feet. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to hear that his father had tried to take his own life. Part of him wanted to keep shouting, but another part, smaller and more frightened, wanted to understand. "I thought you would be better off without me. I thought anyone would be a better father than I was being. I was a drunk, a wreck, and you deserved more. So I left, thinking I was freeing you from me," the old man continued, his voice getting weaker. Mike clenched his fists, anger and confusion battling inside him. "You had no right to make that decision for me," he shouted, but there was less strength in the words now, and more pain. The boy in the back seat finally spoke, his small, frightened voice cutting through the tension. "Please don't fight," he pleaded, looking from one to the other with tears in his eyes. Mike looked at the child carefully for the first time. He was too thin, Wearing old torn clothes with disheveled hair and a dirty face, he had the same expression that Mike remembered having as a child, the same expression of abandonment, of fear, of not knowing where the next safe place would be. The old man placed his hand tenderly on the boy's shoulder, a gesture so paternal that Mike felt a pang of irrational jealousy. "This is Matthew," the old man said softly, looking at Mike. "I found him on the street 2 years ago. He was alone, hungry, sleeping in cardboard boxes. Nobody wanted anything to do with him," he explained, affectionately stroking the boy's head. Mike felt something turn inside him upon hearing this. "I've changed, Mike. It took a long time, many years lost on the streets, but I've changed," the old man continued, his voice gaining slight firmness. "I spent years paying for my mistakes. I lived in the gutter, went hungry, cold, sick. And in every bad moment I thought of you, of what I had done, of the pain I caused," he confessed. Mike wanted the anger to return, for the clarity of rage to protect him from this confusion of emotions. But it didn't come back. Instead, there was only pain. Pain for all the lost time. Pain for the boy he was who never had the chance to be consoled. Pain for the broken man before him who was trying to redeem himself too late. "Now I try to help who I can," the old man said, squeezing Matthew's shoulder. "I can't change what I did to you. I can't bring back the years I stole. But I can try to be for him the father I couldn't be for you. I can try to save at least one child from the streets," he explained, and there was a painful determination in those words. Mike felt as if someone had stuck a knife in his chest and twisted it. Was this it then? His father had abandoned him, destroyed his life, and now was being a father to another child. "You're being for him what you never were for me," Mike said, and his voice came out low, broken, devastated. The old man closed his eyes and more tears ran down his face. "I know, and it kills me inside every day," he admitted. "But I can't go back in time, Mike. I can't undo what I did. All I can do is try to be better now. Try to do something right even if it's too late for us," he said, opening his eyes and facing his son with brutal honesty. Mike shook his head, taking a step back. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to feel anything beyond the justified anger he had cultivated for so many years, but it was impossible not to feel. Impossible not to see the broken and repentant man before him. Impossible not to recognize the genuine pain in his father's eyes. But recognizing did not mean forgiving. Recognizing did not erase 30 years of abandonment. "You think this changes anything?" Mike asked, and his voice was ice-cold now, controlled by a willpower he didn't know he had. "You think that because you're taking care of a street boy now, that erases what you did to me," he continued, and each word was a sentence. The old man didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Mike with an expression of total defeat. "No," he finally said, "I know it doesn't change anything. I know you have every right to hate me." "I hate myself too," he confessed, his voice fading at the end. Mike felt something inside him break upon hearing that. He had expected defensiveness, excuses, attempts to justify the unjustifiable, but his father wasn't doing any of that. He was simply accepting all the blame, all the responsibility, all the condemnation. And somehow that made everything even harder. Mike took another step back, physically distancing himself from the truck, from his father, from that whole situation. "You're not my father anymore," he declared, and the words came out like stones, heavy and definitive. The old man shrank as if he had been physically struck. Matthew began to cry softly, frightened by the tension. "Get out of my truck!" "Now," Mike ordered, pointing to the dark, rainy road. The old man looked at him with an expression of silent desperation. "Mike, it's raining. Just let us at least—" he began, but Mike cut him off immediately. "Now!" he shouted, and his voice echoed through the night. The old man nodded slowly, defeated, and helped Matthew out of the truck. The two stood by the roadside, completely soaked, shivering from the cold. The boy clung to the old man, looking at Mike with fear and confusion. The old man kept his eyes down, as if he didn't have the courage to face his son one more time. Mike climbed back into the truck, slamming the door hard. He started the engine with hands that still trembled, but now for different reasons. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was also something he didn't want to name. Something like remorse, but he pushed that feeling deep into his mind with all the strength he had. "You don't deserve my compassion," he muttered to himself, putting his hand on the gear shift. But before engaging the gear, he looked one last time in the rearview mirror. The old man had put his arm around Matthew, protecting the boy from the rain as best he could with his own thin body. They weren't looking at the truck. They just stood there, two castaways on a dark road, without destination, without hope. Mike felt something tighten in his chest but ignored it. He engaged the gear and stepped on the accelerator, making the truck lurch forward forcefully. The rain hit the windshield with intense force, and the wipers worked at maximum speed trying to provide visibility. Mike looked in the rearview mirror once more and saw the two figures getting smaller and smaller, more distant, until darkness completely swallowed them. He gripped the steering wheel and accelerated even more, as if he could escape not only from them, but from everything that had just happened. "It's over. It's done," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. But even as he drove, getting farther and farther away from that cursed road, he couldn't stop seeing the image of the soaked father protecting that boy from the rain. The tears began to fall again, but this time Mike wasn't sure if they were from anger or something much more complicated. He had waited for this moment. Waited to confront his father, to say everything he needed to say, to finally rid himself of that weight. But now that he had done it, why didn't he feel better? Why hadn't the pain decreased, but increased? He shook his head forcefully, trying to push away the thoughts. He deserved it. "He abandoned you first," Mike repeated to himself, but the words sounded empty, even to his own ears. The road ahead was long and dark, and for the first time in a long time, Mike wasn't sure if he was going in the right direction. All he knew was that he was running away. Running from the past, running from his father, running from that child who looked at him with the same frightened eyes he had when he was small. "I did the right thing," he insisted to the emptiness of the truck, but no one answered. 3 days had passed since that rainy night, but to Mike it seemed like an eternity. He had made 6 deliveries since then, traveled more than 1,000 kilometers, slept in 3 different cities, but none of this could erase the image of the father and the boy disappearing into the darkness. He tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing, that he had every right to react that way, that the abandonment of 30 years ago justified anything he had said or done. But the nights were the worst. When he stopped to rest and silence took over the truck cabin, the memories came back with brutal force. He saw his father's face, soaked and devastated. He saw the boy trembling with cold, clinging to the old man. He saw the yellowed photo falling to the truck floor. And then came the guilt, silent but relentless, eating away inside like a worm. Mike drank black, strong coffee to ward off sleep, because sleeping meant dreaming, and dreaming meant reliving everything again. "I did the right thing. He deserved it," he repeated to himself every time doubt began to creep in. But the words lost strength with each repetition. That morning, Mike was driving down a familiar road, the same one he traveled every week. The sky was gray, threatening rain again, and the radio played softly an old song he wasn't paying attention to. He had one more delivery to make before the end of the day, and then he could finally stop at a hotel and take a decent shower. Maybe eat something that wasn't a reheated gas station sandwich. Maybe get a few hours of sleep without waking up in the middle of the night with his heart racing. He adjusted the rearview mirror and saw his own reflection. He had deep dark circles, 3 days of stubble, red and tired eyes. He looked 10 years older than he was. He looked like a man who was running from something, and perhaps that was exactly what he was doing. The song on the radio ended, and the announcer began to speak. Mike was going to change the station, but something in the man's voice made him stop. There was an urgency there, a seriousness that captured his attention. "We interrupt our programming for an important announcement," the announcer said, and Mike turned up the volume without knowing exactly why. The announcer's voice filled the truck cabin, clear and deep. "A serious accident happened on the highway last night. An elderly man is in critical condition in the city hospital. Witnesses report that he was protecting a child at the moment of the accident. The child only had a few scratches and is accompanying the elderly man at the hospital," the announcer narrated, and Mike felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know why that news affected him so much. Accidents happened every day. People got hurt, died, and life went on. But there was something in that story that resonated within him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the mention of an elderly man protecting a child. Perhaps it was the fresh memory of the father hugging the boy in the rain. Mike shook his head, trying to push away the thoughts, but he couldn't turn off the radio. He needed to hear the rest. The elderly man has not yet been identified, as he had no documents at the time of the accident, the announcer continued, and Mike felt his stomach turn. "It can't be," he murmured, but his voice came out weak, doubtful, as if he already knew the truth that was about to come. The announcer continued with more details, and each word was like a sledgehammer hitting Mike's chest. According to medical reports, the elderly man pushed the child out of the vehicle's path, saving the boy's life but being hit head-on. He suffered severe trauma and is in critical condition. Doctors report that he has few hours to live if he doesn't receive proper treatment, the voice explained, and Mike felt his hands begin to tremble on the steering wheel. The description continued, each detail making everything more real, closer, more impossible to ignore. The patient appears to be about 70 years old, has a visible scar on the left side of his face, long white hair, and was wearing very worn clothes, the announcer described, and at that moment, Mike's world stopped spinning. The scar on his face. He remembered that scar. His father had fallen from a ladder when he was little, had hit his face and been left with that mark. "No, no, no," he repeated, gripping the steering wheel so hard that his fingers hurt. But the final confirmation came like thunder. The announcer said the name, and it was as if someone had pulled the ground from under Mike's feet. The child who was with him managed to provide the elderly man's name. "His name is Richard Henderson," the voice announced, and Mike stepped on the brake so hard that the truck skidded on the road before stopping on the shoulder. Richard Henderson. That was his father's name. The name he had tried to forget for 30 years, the name that was registered on his birth certificate, but that he had never again pronounced out loud. Mike turned off the engine with trembling hands and sat there paralyzed as the announcer continued talking. "Authorities are trying to locate relatives of Mr. Richard Henderson. The hospital reports that he needs family authorization to perform emergency surgery. Without this authorization, and without the surgery, doctors believe he will not survive the next few hours," the announcer explained, and each word was a stab. Mike felt tears burning his eyes, but this time he couldn't hold them back. They fell freely, wetting his face as he tried to process what he was hearing. "My God, what have I done?" he whispered into the emptiness of the cabin. The radio continued, and Mike heard a child's voice in the background. It was a recording, probably from the call that the boy had made to the station. The voice was familiar, trembling and frightened, and Mike knew immediately it was the boy who was with his father. "Please, someone needs to help my grandpa," the child begged, and the sound of that voice broke something inside Mike. "His name is Richard Henderson. He told me he has a son named Mike. Please, if anyone knows a Mike Henderson, he needs to come. The doctor said Grandpa will die if his son doesn't come." The boy continued sobbing, and Mike felt as if he was falling apart. The boy had heard the conversation in the truck that night, had heard when the father spoke his name, and now he was using that information to try to save the elderly man's life. Mike covered his face with his hands, shoulders trembling as he cried. He had left them in the rain, had thrown them out of the truck with anger and hatred. And now his father was dying. "I killed him. I killed my own father," Mike groaned, guilt crushing his chest like a giant stone. The announcer spoke again, giving more information. "The hospital is located in the city, and anyone who has information about relatives of Mr. Richard Henderson should contact immediately. The child who is with him, a boy who identified himself only as a friend, is desperate for help." "Time is running out," the voice concluded before returning to regular programming. But Mike didn't hear anything else. He turned off the radio and sat there in absolute silence, trying to understand what to do. His father was dying. The man who had abandoned him, who had destroyed his childhood, whom he had hated for 30 years, was dying. And only he could save him. But why? Why should he do it? The father hadn't stayed to save him when he was a child. Hadn't stayed when he needed him most. Why should Mike do differently now? "He abandoned me. He doesn't deserve my help," Mike said aloud, trying to convince himself, but the words sounded empty and cruel even to him. Mike picked up his cell phone with trembling hands and searched for the hospital address. It was 40 minutes away. 40 minutes that could be the difference between life and death. He looked at the steering wheel, at the road ahead, at the cell phone in his hand. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion, as if time itself was waiting for his decision. He could simply start the engine again and keep driving. He could make his delivery, get paid, go on with his life as if nothing had happened. Nobody would know, nobody would judge him. His father had disappeared without a trace 30 years ago, and now he could disappear again, this time forever. It would be poetic justice in a way, abandonment being repaid with abandonment. Mike took a deep breath, but the air wasn't reaching his lungs properly. He felt suffocated, trapped, as if the truck walls were closing in around him. He deserved it. He reaped what he sowed, Mike said, but even as he spoke, he knew he was trying to convince himself of something he didn't believe. The memories came back with full force, flooding his mind without mercy. He remembered his mother in the hospital, asking him to take care of his father. Remembered his father sitting in that armchair, destroyed by pain, drowning his sorrow in alcohol. Remembered waking up alone on that cold night, watching his father disappear into the darkness. Remembered the years in shelters, the feeling of not belonging anywhere, the anger that grew every day. But he also remembered something else. He remembered his father before everything collapsed. The father who took him to the park, who told funny stories, who made him laugh until his stomach hurt. The father who loved his mother with such intensity that when she died, he died with her. Mike shook his head, trying to push away these memories. It was easier to hate when you only remembered the bad things. But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that his father had been a good man who was broken by a tragedy. That didn't justify the abandonment, but it made everything less black and white. But he left me. He chose to go away, Mike argued with himself, but the voice of doubt was getting louder. Then came another thought, even more disturbing. If he didn't go to the hospital, if he let his father die, would he be any different from the man he hated so much? His father had abandoned him because he was broken, lost, thinking it was best for his son. But what about Mike? If he abandoned his father now, what would his excuse be? Would it be revenge? Would it be justice? Or would it simply be becoming the same thing he despised? Mike felt a lump in his throat. He had spent his entire life trying to be different from his father, trying not to be the man who runs away, who abandons, who gives up. But if he did this now, if he let his father die when he had the power to save him, wouldn't he be doing exactly the same thing? If I don't go, I'm just like him, Mike whispered, and that realization hurt more than anything else. He had become a lonely, closed-off man, unable to connect with people exactly as his father had been. He had repeated the pattern he swore to break, and now he had the chance to do differently. But did he want to do differently? Mike remembered the last time he saw his father, soaked in the rain, protecting the boy with his own body. Remembered the old man's words, admitting his mistakes, accepting all the blame, not trying to defend himself or justify. "I've changed," his father had said, and maybe he had changed. The accident proved that. His father had thrown himself in front of a vehicle to save a child, had put the boy's life above his own. That wasn't the act of a selfish or cowardly man. That was the act of someone trying to redeem himself, someone trying to be better. And Mike had kicked him out of the truck without giving him a chance to prove he had changed, without giving him a chance to explain, to reconnect, to perhaps build something new on the rubble of the past. He was taking care of that boy. He sacrificed himself in the accident, Mike thought, and felt the tears coming back. Maybe his father didn't deserve forgiveness. Maybe 30 years couldn't be erased with a few words and an act of heroism, but he deserved at least a chance to live. It's my last chance to have a father, Mike realized, and that truth was both terrifying and liberating. He looked at the truck's dashboard and saw the yellowed photograph still there. The frightened 8-year-old boy stared back at him, as if waiting for an answer. "What do I do, Mum?" Mike asked aloud, looking at the faded image of the woman next to the boy in the photo. He wished she was there, that she could tell him what to do, that she could guide him like she did when he was a child. But she wasn't. She never would be again. All that remained was him and his choices. He could choose anger and let his father die. He could choose revenge and feel justified. Or he could choose forgiveness, even if it hurt, even if it seemed unfair, even if it meant reopening wounds he had spent 30 years trying to close. Mike didn't know if he had the strength to forgive. He didn't know if he could ever look at his father and not feel the pain of abandonment. But he knew one thing: if he didn't try, if he let hatred win, he would never be free. He would be trapped in that cycle of pain and loneliness forever. "It's either now or never again," he muttered, feeling the crushing weight of that decision. Mike started the truck's engine, and the familiar rumble filled the silence. His hands were still shaking, and tears still wet his face, but he placed his hands on the wheel with determination. Ahead was a crossroads. Turning right led to the hospital, to the city, to the father who was dying. Turning left led to the delivery, to work, to the life he knew, away from all that confusion and pain. He stopped the truck right in front of the crossroads, the engine running, waiting. The world seemed to be holding its breath, awaiting his choice. Mike looked to the right, imagining his father lying in a hospital bed, fragile and broken, perhaps even unconscious. Imagining the boy beside him, that child his father had chosen to care for when he hadn't cared for his own son. And then he looked to the left, imagining the empty road, the easy escape, the uncomplicated life. "I have the right to leave. I have the right to let him pay for what he did," Mike thought. But the words didn't bring the relief he expected. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to find some clarity in that chaos of emotions. Anger, pain, fear, guilt, hope, all mixed in an impossible whirlwind to separate. When he opened his eyes again, he looked once more at the photo on the dashboard. The boy in the image seemed to be begging for something. Perhaps for justice. Perhaps for mercy. Perhaps just for a chance not to grow up with the same hatred that had poisoned Mike's life for so long. "I don't want to carry this anymore," Mike admitted to himself, and it was the first time in 30 years that he allowed this thought. He was tired. Tired of anger. Tired of loneliness. Tired of pretending he didn't miss having a family. His father wasn't perfect. He had made terrible mistakes, unforgivable even. But he was still his father, and maybe, just maybe, there was still time for something more. Even if it wasn't complete forgiveness, even if it was just the chance to say goodbye without hatred. "It's my last chance," he repeated, and this time the words had the weight of truth. Mike put his hand on the gear shift, feeling the cold metal under his trembling fingers. The traffic light ahead was green, waiting for his decision. Right or left, forgiveness or abandonment, breaking the cycle or perpetuating it. He knew that whatever choice he made would change his life forever. There was no going back. There was no middle ground. It was all or nothing. He looked one last time at each side, weighing everything in his mind and heart. He thought of the boy he had been, abandoned and alone. He thought of the man he had become, closed off and bitter. He thought of the father he could have had, and the father he might still get to know, even if for a short time. He thought of all the choices that had brought him to this moment, and all the choices he could still make. The tears kept falling, but now there was something different about them. It wasn't just pain. It was also liberation. The liberation of finally, after so long, making a choice that wasn't based on anger or fear. "What do I do?" Mike asked one last time, but this time he already knew the answer. Mike took a deep breath and turned the wheel to the left. The decision left his hands before his brain could fully process what he was doing. The truck entered the road that would take him away from the hospital, away from his father, away from all that pain and confusion. He accelerated, feeling the engine roar under the hood, and tried to focus only on the road ahead. The trees passed quickly by the windows, green and brown blurs that had no meaning at all. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if this could anchor his decision, make it more solid, more justifiable. "He doesn't deserve it," Mike said aloud, trying to fill the heavy silence of the cabin. "He abandoned me first. I don't owe him anything. Nothing," he continued, but his voice came out trembling, unconvincing. He pressed harder on the accelerator, as if speed could distance not only the hospital, but also the guilt that was already beginning to crawl through his chest. "I made my choice." "It's over," he muttered, but felt a tightness in his throat that made it difficult to breathe. The first few miles passed in tense silence. Mike kept his eyes fixed on the road, refusing to look to the sides or in the rearview mirror. refusing to think about what he was leaving behind. But guilt needed no invitation to enter. It arrived silently, like a cold fog that infiltrates through every crack. With each mile he traveled, it grew a little more, weighed a little more, squeezed a little more. He tried to turn on the radio to distract his mind, but as soon as the music started playing, he immediately turned it off. He couldn't hear anything beyond his own thoughts, which screamed louder and louder inside his head. He shook his head forcefully, trying to push away the voices, but they wouldn't leave. "He's dying and you're running away," a voice whispered in his mind. "No, I'm moving forward, that's different," Mike answered himself. But even he knew it was a lie. He was running away. He was doing exactly what he had accused his father of doing. "But I have reasons. I have the right to be angry," he insisted. But the words sounded hollow. The flashbacks began without warning, invading his mind like overwhelming waves he couldn't contain. Suddenly he was 8 years old again, sitting alone in that empty house, waiting for his father to return. He could feel the cold of that night, the fear that tightened his small chest, the loneliness that seemed to swallow everything around him. He remembered crying until he had no more tears, screaming his father's name until his voice went hoarse, waiting at the door until the sun rose. And his father never came back. Mike blinked hard, trying to push away the images, but they kept coming. He saw his mother on her deathbed, so fragile and pale, holding his hand with what little strength she still had. He saw his father sitting in that armchair, lost in a bottle, unable to look at his son. He saw the man's silhouette disappearing into the darkness, leaving him alone in the world. "He left me," Mike said, and his voice broke. "He left me when I needed him most. Why should I do any different?" He asked the emptiness, but nobody answered. Just the rumble of the engine and the sound of wind hitting the windows. Then came the most recent and painful memory. The boy's voice on the radio, desperate and frightened, begging for help. "Please, someone help my grandfather," the child had said, and those words echoed in Mike's mind like a funeral bell. He could hear the desperation in that voice, the fear of losing someone he loved. It was the same voice he had used as a child, begging his father not to leave. And now he was in his father's place, being the person who abandoned, who ran away, who chose not to be present. Mike felt his stomach turn and had to hold back the nausea rising in his throat. He slowed down slightly, his vision beginning to blur from the tears that insisted on falling. "I'm doing exactly what he did to me." The realization hit Mike like a punch to the stomach. He had spent 30 years hating his father for abandoning him, and now he was doing the same thing. He was letting a man die when he had the power to save him. "I am just like him," Mike whispered, and that truth hurt more than anything else ever had. The truck continued advancing down the road, but Mike was no longer paying attention to where he was going. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a vicious cycle of memories and guilt. He remembered all the times he had sworn to himself that he would be different from his father, that he would never abandon anyone, that he would never run away from his responsibilities, that he would never be a coward. But what was he doing now? He was running away. He was abandoning his father at the moment he needed him most. And why? Out of pride? Out of anger? Out of a childish need for revenge? Mike realized that none of it was worth it. None of it compensated for the weight he was feeling in his chest, the guilt that was crushing his soul. He had every right to never forgive his father, but letting him die? That wasn't justice, it was cruelty. And Mike wasn't cruel, or at least he didn't want to be. "What am I doing?" he asked aloud, and his voice came out laden with despair and confusion. He looked at his own hands on the steering wheel, violently shaking, and barely recognized them as his own. Suddenly, Mike slammed on the brakes with all the strength he had. The truck skidded on the road, tires screeching on the asphalt, before coming to a complete stop on the shoulder. He turned off the engine and sat there, breathing heavily, heart pounding inside his chest. For a long moment, he did nothing. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then something inside him broke. He hit the steering wheel in desperation, frustration overflowing in every movement. He let his anger explode in shouts that echoed through the empty cab, each word laden with regret and pain. "I'm not like him," Mike shouted, his voice torn and desperate. "I'm not," he repeated, punching the steering wheel once more. Tears were falling freely now, wetting his face, dropping onto his clothes. He cried like he hadn't since childhood, with deep sobs that shook his entire body. He cried for the child he once was, for the man he had become, for the father he was losing before even having the chance to truly reconnect with him. I have to go back, he realized, and that truth brought relief and terror in equal parts. Mike started the engine again, but his hands were trembling so much he could barely turn the key. He wiped the tears with the back of his hand, took a deep breath trying to calm himself, and made a sharp U-turn on the road. The truck almost tipped over with the aggressive maneuver, but he didn't care. All that mattered now was getting to the hospital, getting there in time. Saving his father, even if it changed nothing between them. Even if his father never knew it was him who saved his life. He accelerated, pushing the pedal to the floor, and the truck quickly gained speed. Mike looked at the clock on the dashboard and felt panic tightening even more. Almost 2 hours had passed since he heard the news on the radio. 2 hours he had wasted running away when he should have been rushing to the hospital. "Please hold on," he begged into the air, as if his father could hear him somehow. "Just hold on a little longer, I'm coming," he promised, and pushed the accelerator even deeper, making the engine roar in protest. But the universe seemed determined to test his resolve. Just minutes after making the U-turn, the already grey sky began to pour down rain with frightening intensity. In seconds, visibility dropped to almost zero. Mike turned the wipers to maximum speed, but they could barely handle the water falling torrentially. He had to reduce his speed, desperate, each second lost seeming like an eternity. The road became slippery and dangerous, and he needed all his concentration to keep the truck on the right path. The sky had turned almost night dark, and lightning cut across the horizon with terrifying frequency. Mike tried to go faster, but it was too risky. One mistake and he could flip over, and then he wouldn't reach the hospital at all. "Hold on, Dad." "Just hold on," he repeated like a mantra, trying to stay focused even as panic grew inside him like a desperate beast. As if the storm wasn't enough, the truck began making a strange noise. A metallic grinding coming from the engine, followed by a burning smell that invaded the cabin. Mike looked at the dashboard and saw the temperature light rising dangerously. The engine was overheating. "No, no, no!" he shouted, punching the steering wheel again. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't lose more time. But the truck was starting to lose power, the grinding getting louder. Mike had to pull over to the shoulder again, this time not by choice. He got out of the truck in the torrential rain, instantly drenched, and opened the hood. A cloud of steam came out of the engine, and he saw that a hose had burst. It was something that could be fixed, but it would take time. Time he didn't have. Mike wanted to scream, wanted to kick something, but instead just stood there in the rain, feeling the cold water soak his clothes, mixing with the tears that were still falling. "I won't make it in time," he thought, and the despair was so intense it almost brought him to his knees. But Mike wasn't one to give up. He had spent his entire life surviving, fighting, moving forward no matter what happened. And he wouldn't stop now. He ran back to the cab, grabbed his phone with trembling hands and looked for the hospital's number. It took 3 attempts to dial correctly, his wet fingers slipping on the screen. When he finally managed, the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring seemed to last an eternity. "Answer, answer, answer," he begged. Finally, a female voice answered on the other end. "Central Hospital, how can I help you?" she said with a professional calmness that strongly contrasted with the chaos Mike felt. "I need to talk about a patient, Richard Henderson. Please, how much time does he have?" Mike shouted, his voice coming out desperate and hoarse. There was a pause on the other end, and he could hear the sound of keys being typed. "1 moment, sir," the woman said, and those seconds of waiting were torturous. When the voice returned, there was an urgency in it that wasn't there before. "Sir, the patient is in critical condition. He lost a lot of fluid in the accident. He needs an urgent transfusion. His type is rare, and we don't have any available in the hospital. We need a family member now, sir." "It's a matter of life and death," she explained quickly, and each word was like a knife in Mike's heart. He felt the world spin around him, the rain, the broken truck, everything seeming to conspire against him. "I'm his son. I'm coming." "Please wait, don't let him die," Mike shouted into the phone, his voice breaking. "My truck broke down, but I'll get there. I promise I'll get there. Just please make him hold on until I arrive." Out he begged, tears mixing with the rain on his face. The woman on the other end hesitated for a moment before responding. "Sir, I'll inform the medical team, but I need you to hurry." "We don't have much time," she said, and the gravity in her voice made clear how critical the situation was. I swear I will," Mike promised before hanging up. He looked at the broken truck, at the storm around him, at the road he still needed to travel. The hospital was at least 30 kilometers away. With a broken truck, in the storm, without help, it seemed impossible, but he had to try. He had to find a way. Mike got out of the truck and ran to the road, trying to stop any passing vehicle. But with the storm, there were few cars, and none stopped. They passed by at high speed, throwing water in all directions, leaving Mike increasingly wet and desperate. He waved, shouted, begged, but nobody stopped. After 10 minutes, that felt like hours. Finally, an old car stopped beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged man with a concerned expression. "Are you okay?" the man asked, looking at Mike soaked and clearly desperate. "I need to get to the hospital. Urgent, please," Mike begged, and there must have been something in his voice that touched the man because he nodded immediately. "Get in, quick," the man ordered, and Mike didn't waste time. The car took off as soon as Mike closed the door, and he thanked fervently. "My father is dying. I need to get to the hospital now," Mike explained quickly, his voice still trembling. The man just nodded and accelerated as much as the storm allowed. But even so, the heavy traffic made everything slower. There were other cars on the road, all driving cautiously because of the rain, creating lines that seemed endless. Mike looked at the clock every few seconds, watching the minutes pass like sand slipping through his fingers. Each red light was torture. Each slow car in front was an unbearable obstacle. "Go, go, go," he muttered to himself, nervously tapping his foot on the car floor. The man driving tried to go as fast as possible, deviating when he could, but there were limits. The city finally appeared on the horizon, and Mike felt a flash of hope. "We're almost there," the man said, trying to reassure him. "It needs to be now," Mike replied, his voice coming out like a desperate moan. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Mike opened the door before the car even completely stopped. Thank you so much," he shouted to the man before running toward the entrance. He was completely soaked, his shoes making water noises with each step, but he didn't care. He ran through the automatic doors, almost knocking down a person who was leaving, and went straight to the reception. A woman in a white uniform looked at him with surprise and a bit of alarm. "I'm the son. Richard Henderson, where is he?" Mike shouted, leaning on the counter, breathless. The woman quickly checked the computer, and her face became serious. "Third floor emergency room, quick!" She indicated the corridor, and Mike was already running before she even finished the sentence. He found the stairs because he couldn't wait for the elevator, going up the steps 2 at a time, his heart beating so hard it seemed about to explode. When he reached the 3rd floor, a doctor was coming out of a room, and Mike ran to him. "I'm Mike Henderson. I'm Richard's son. Where is my father?" He practically shouted, holding the doctor's arm. The man looked him up and down, seeing his soaked clothes, his desperate face, and nodded quickly. "You got here on time. Come with me." "Now," the doctor said urgently, and started walking quickly down the hallway. Mike followed him, his entire body trembling, partly from the cold of his wet clothes, partly from adrenaline and fear. They entered a room where several machines were beeping, and there, lying on a stretcher, was his father. He looked even more fragile than the last time Mike had seen him. He was pale, with tubes connected to his body, eyes closed. Next to the stretcher, clutching a chair, was the boy, his eyes red from crying. When he saw Mike, the child's face lit up with desperate hope. "You came," the boy said, and his voice was loaded with relief and gratitude. Mike couldn't answer. He just looked at his father, feeling his chest tighten painfully. The doctor wasted no time. "We need to do the transfusion now. Do you have the same blood type?" he asked, already preparing the equipment. Mike nodded quickly. "Yes, take as much as you need. Take it all if necessary," and he said, and the doctor signaled to a nurse who was already bringing a second stretcher. "Lie down here," the doctor ordered, and Mike obeyed immediately. He didn't even feel when the needle entered his arm. All he could do was look at his father lying beside him, So close and yet so distant. They were connected now, literally. The transfusion had begun, and Mike was keeping his father alive. It was strange, poetic even, in a painful way. After so many years apart, after so much hatred and resentment, this is what brought them together. An urgent transfusion, an exchange of life. Mike felt the tears return, but this time he didn't try to hold them back. He let them fall freely as he watched his father's pale face. "Hang on, old man. I'm here now." "I won't abandon you," he whispered, though he knew his father couldn't hear him. The minutes passed slowly, marked only by the constant sound of the machines and the hum of the transfusion equipment. Mike felt increasingly weaker as the process continued, but he didn't care. He would do anything necessary to save him. The doctor monitored both of them carefully, checking vital signs, adjusting equipment. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he disconnected the tubes and checked the monitor one last time. He looked at Mike with an expression that was difficult to decipher. It wasn't exactly hopeful, but it wasn't hopeless either. "The transfusion is working," the doctor said, and Mike felt such great relief that he almost collapsed. But then the doctor continued, and his next words brought reality back. "But he's very weak. His body has suffered a lot of trauma. We don't know if he'll resist. The next few hours will be critical," he explained, and those words hung in the air like an uncertain sentence. Mike looked at his father, at the chest that rose and fell weakly, at the machines that kept that life hanging by a thread. He had arrived on time, had done everything he could, but now all that remained was to wait. Wait and hope that, for the first time in a long time, fate would be kind to them. "Hang on, Dad, please hang on," Mike whispered once more, squeezing the old man's cold hand, and remained there beside him, refusing to leave. The hospital waiting room was a soulless place. Cold white walls, uncomfortable blue plastic chairs, an old television in the corner showing some program that nobody watched. Mike was sitting in one of those chairs, still with damp clothes clinging to his body, feeling the cold penetrate to his bones. But it wasn't the physical cold that bothered him. It was the waiting. The terrible and distressing wait without knowing whether his father would survive or not. The boy was sitting next to him, huddled in the chair, his eyes red and swollen from crying. They hadn't exchanged many words since leaving the emergency room. They just sat there, two strangers united by the same person, waiting for news that could be good or devastating. Mike looked at the clock on the wall every few minutes, watching the hands move with torturous slowness. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Each minute seemed like an eternity, and the silence of the waiting room was broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps in the corridor or the distant beep of some machine. "He's going to be okay," the boy said suddenly, his voice small but full of desperate determination. Mike looked at him and saw so much faith in those childish eyes that he felt his heart tighten. Mike didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe, wanted to have that same innocent faith that the boy had, but the fear was too great. "How did you meet my father?" Mike asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. The boy wiped his nose with the back of his hand and looked at Mike with those big, sad eyes. "I was on the street, alone. I'd run away from a bad place," the boy began, his voice trembling slightly. "I was hungry every day. I slept in cardboard boxes, begged for food, sometimes stole when there was no other way. One day I was fainting from hunger when Mr. Richard found me," he continued, and there was tenderness in the way he spoke about the old man. "He gave me food, took me to a safe place, gave me clean clothes. I thought it would be just for that day, but he came back the next day. And the next and the next. He started taking care of me," the boy explained, and tears began to fall again. Mike felt a lump in his throat hearing that. "He always talked about you," the boy said, looking directly at Mike now. "He said you were strong, brave, that you had survived terrible things and become a good man. He was so proud of you, even without having seen you in so many years," the boy revealed, and those words hit Mike like lightning. Mike felt the tears falling. He hadn't expected to hear that. Hadn't expected to know that his father thought of him, talked about him, was proud of him. "He taught me to read," the boy continued, with a sad smile on his lips. "He didn't know much, but he knew enough. Every night, no matter where we were, he would take old newspapers or books he found and teach me the letters. He said education was the only thing no one could take away from me, he explained, wiping his tears with his sleeve. Mike looked at that child and saw so much of himself there, the loneliness, the abandonment, the despair. But he also saw something he hadn't had, someone who cared. He told me once that he was paying a debt, the boy said quietly, looking at his own hands. I didn't understand at the time, but now, after meeting you, I think I understand. He was trying to be for me what he couldn't be for you, he concluded, and that truth hurt and healed at the same time. Mike put his hand on the boy's shoulder. He succeeded. He was a good father to you, Mike said, and realized he truly believed that. The hours kept passing, each one heavier than the last. Mike tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face, pale and fragile, connected to those machines. He saw the lost years, the unspoken words, the wasted opportunities. He thought about all the times he had imagined this meeting, always with anger, always planning what he would say, how he would make his father pay. But now that it was actually happening, nothing was as he had imagined. There was no satisfaction in revenge, no relief in anger. There was only sadness and regret for all the lost time. Why did I wait so long? Mike wondered, but knew there was no answer that would make things better. The boy had fallen asleep beside him, his head resting on Mike's shoulder, breathing softly. Mike looked at him and felt something strange. A responsibility, perhaps, a connection he hadn't expected to feel. If his father died, what would happen to that boy? Would he return to the streets, to the system, to another bad place? I won't let that happen, Mike thought, surprised by the determination in his own mind. Finally, after a long time, the door to the operating room opened and a doctor came out. Mike stood up so quickly he almost knocked over the boy, who woke up startled. The doctor walked toward them, removing his surgical mask, and Mike tried to read his expression, looking for any sign of good or bad news. His heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. The doctor stopped in front of them, and for a brief second that seemed to last years, said nothing. Then finally a small smile appeared on his tired face. The surgery was successful, the doctor announced, and those words were like oxygen to Mike, who hadn't realized he was holding his breath. He's waking up now. He's still very weak, but his vital signs are stable. The transfusions saved his life, the doctor explained, looking at Mike with something that seemed like respect. Mike felt his legs weaken and had to lean on the chair to keep from falling. The relief was so great, so overwhelming, that he couldn't hold back the tears. They fell freely as he covered his face with his hands. He's alive. He's going to be okay, Mike repeated to himself, as if he needed to hear the words to believe them. The boy jumped for joy, shouting and crying at the same time, and hugged Mike with such force that he almost knocked him over. Mike hugged him back, and the two stayed there, crying with relief, united by that moment of grace. "Can I see him?" Mike asked the doctor, wiping his face with the back of his hand. The doctor nodded but raised his hand in a gesture of caution. "Yes, but he's still very weak. You can't stay long, and only one person at a time," he instructed. Mike looked at the boy, who immediately shook his head. "You go first. He needs to see you," the boy said, and there was a wisdom in those words that didn't match his age. Mike nodded, grateful, and followed the doctor down the hallway. Each step seemed to weigh a ton. He was about to see his father awake, alive, for the first time since that terrible night 30 years ago. He didn't know what to say, what to do, how to act. All he knew was that his heart was beating so hard, it felt like it wanted to burst out of his chest. "Be prepared. He's very different from what you must remember," the doctor warned before opening the door to the room, and Mike just nodded, unable to form words. The room was small and quiet, except for the constant sound of machines monitoring vital signs. Mike entered slowly, as if afraid to break something with his steps, and then he saw his father was lying in bed, so small and fragile he barely seemed real. There were tubes connected to his arms, a monitor beside him showing his heart rate, and an oxygen mask covering part of his face. But his eyes were open. Those tired brown eyes that Mike knew so well were open and looking directly at him. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. They just looked at each other, father and son, separated by 3 decades of pain, but now just a few steps apart. Mike saw recognition in his father's eyes, followed by something that looked like disbelief. The elderly man tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled his words. He raised his trembling hand and tried to remove the mask, but had no strength. Mike quickly approached, helping him carefully, and when the mask was removed, his father managed to whisper, You came," he said, and his voice was weak but full of overwhelming emotion. Mike felt the tears return, uncontrollable now. "I came, Dad," he replied, his own voice breaking. Mike pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, holding his father's cold, fragile hand between his own. It was strange to touch that hand after so long, strange and familiar at the same time. "I'm sorry for leaving you on the road," Mike began, the words coming out in a desperate rush. "I was so angry, so full of hate. I couldn't see beyond my own pain, but I shouldn't have done that. You were in the rain with the boy and I just drove away. I'm sorry," he confessed, squeezing his father's hand. The elderly man weakly shook his head, and more tears ran down his marked face. "No," he whispered, each word seeming to cost an immense effort. "I'm the one who's sorry. I abandoned you. I left you when you were just a child. I was a coward. I ran away because I couldn't handle the pain of losing your mother. But that doesn't justify anything. I ruined your life," his father said, his voice full of regret and guilt. Mike shook his head, tears falling onto the hand he was holding. "But you never stopped loving me. I know that now. The boy told me. You always talked about me, always thought about me. And you changed. You became the man that boy needed," Mike replied, and felt something inside him begin to heal. His father squeezed Mike's hand with what little strength he had. "I never stopped loving you, son. Not for a day. Every night I would look at the stars and wonder where you were, if you were okay, if you were happy. I wanted to come back so many times. But I was so afraid. Afraid that you would hate me. Afraid that my presence would only bring more pain," his father confessed, and each word weighed like lead. Mike leaned in closer, holding his father's hand with both hands now. "I did hate you. I hated you so much that it consumed my entire life. I closed myself off, became lonely, unable to trust anyone. I became everything I feared most," Mike admitted, his voice completely breaking. "But I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to carry this hatred anymore. It's killing me inside," he continued, and it was the first time he had admitted this out loud. His father looked at him with so much love and so much sadness that it was almost unbearable. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," his father whispered, but Mike firmly shook his head. "Maybe not, but I need to forgive you. Not for you, but for me. To move forward. To be free," Mike explained, and felt the truth of those words resonate in his chest. Mike stood up from the chair and very carefully hugged his father. It was a light embrace, afraid of hurting him, but full of decades of repressed emotions. His father cried on his shoulder, weak but deep sobs, and Mike cried too. There in that hospital room, with the sound of machines in the background and the smell of disinfectant in the air, years of pain began to dissolve. They didn't completely disappear. Perhaps they never would, but they began to lose the power they had over them. "I forgive you, Father," Mike whispered in the old man's ear, and felt an immense weight lifted from his shoulders. "I forgive you for everything. For leaving me, for not coming back, for all the lost years. I forgive you," he repeated, and each repetition made the words more true. The father squeezed Mike with what little strength he had, and when they finally separated, both had trembling smiles on their tear-stained faces. "Thank you," the father said, and that simple word carried the weight of a universe of gratitude. Mike nodded, unable to speak, and wiped the tears from his face. "Now we'll have time, we'll recover everything we lost," Mike promised, and he believed it with every fiber of his being. The door to the room opened softly, and the boy entered, walking on tiptoe as if afraid to break the moment. When he saw his father awake, his face lit up and he ran to the bed. "You're okay. You're okay," the boy repeated, holding the old man's other hand. The father smiled at him, a tired but genuine smile, and stroked the boy's hair. "I'm fine, little one. Thanks to both of you," the father said, looking from one to the other. There in that moment they looked like a family, broken, mended, unlikely, but a family nonetheless. The father looked at Mike with a serious expression. "Take care of him for me," the father asked, pointing to the boy with his eyes. "Be the father I couldn't be. Please, he pleaded, and there was a desperation in that request that made Mike straighten up. Mike looked at the boy, who stared at him with hope and fear in equal parts, and then looked back at the father. "No," Mike said, and saw the confusion in his father's eyes. "You will take care of him with me," Mike corrected, squeezing his father's hand firmly. "We're going to start over, the three of us. We're going to be a real family. You're going to teach me to be the father I never had, and together we'll take care of him," Mike declared, pointing to the boy, who was now crying with happiness. The father looked at Mike with so much gratitude and love that more tears fell. "The three of us," the father repeated, and those words seemed like a sacred promise. After a few more days in the hospital, with the father's surprisingly quick recovery, the doctors finally discharged him. Mike couldn't believe the happiness he felt signing the release papers. He had rented a small apartment, nothing luxurious but clean and welcoming, where the three of them could live together. On the way home, the father looked out the window like a child discovering the world, smiling at every tree, every person passing by. The boy was excited, talking non-stop about the plans they had, about the school Mike had promised to enroll him in, about the books they would read together. Mike drove carefully, looking in the rearview mirror from time to time to make sure this was real, that it wasn't just a dream that would disappear upon waking. "The three of us," he murmured to himself, and the smile that appeared on his face was genuine and full of hope. For the first time in decades, Mike wasn't alone. He had a family, and he would do everything to protect and care for it. Everything's going to be fine now, he thought, and allowed himself to believe it completely. The first days together were like a dream. The apartment, which was previously just an empty, cold space, came to life. The boy ran through the rooms, arranging his few belongings, choosing which would be his favorite corner. The father sat in the armchair by the window, watching with eyes full of tears of happiness, still not believing this was happening. Mike cooked, something he hadn't done in years, and the three ate together at the table, talking, laughing, sharing stories. They watched old movies on television, played simple games with old cards, read books aloud. The father talked about the mother, about how funny she was, how she had a contagious laugh, how she made the best cakes. Mike shared memories he had kept for so long, and each memory told was a wound being stitched. They looked at old photos together, pointing to people and places, reconstructing the past. "Your mother would be so proud of you," the father said one night, holding a yellowed photo of her. "She always knew you would be a good man. She saw it in you even when you were so small," he continued, and Mike had to look away to hide the tears. "I wasted so much time being angry," Mike admitted quietly, but the father shook his head. "You didn't waste it. You survived. You became strong. And now we're here together. That's what matters," the father replied, and there was a wisdom in those words that brought comfort to Mike. Days turned into weeks, and a routine was established. Mike enrolled the boy in school, bought uniforms and school supplies, and watched him leave every morning with a backpack on his shoulders and a smile on his face. The father stayed at home, still recovering, but always busy. He cleaned, organized, cooked when he had the strength. In the afternoon, when the boy returned, he helped with homework, taught what he could, encouraged when the boy became frustrated. Mike worked less, accepting only nearby deliveries so he could return home every day. He didn't want to miss a single moment of that new life they had built. They had dinner together every night, sharing how each one's day had been. It was simple, it was ordinary, but for Mike it was everything. It was the family he never had. It was the second chance he didn't think he deserved. "I've never been so happy," Mike confessed to his father one night after the boy had gone to sleep. The father smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Neither have I, son. Neither have I," he replied, and the two sat there in comfortable silence. But happiness, as Mike should have learned, was always fragile. It was on an ordinary afternoon when the father was in the living room reading an old book they had found in a used bookstore that everything changed. Mike was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he heard a strange noise. It was as if something had fallen. He dropped the knife he was holding and ran to the living room. The father was on the floor, kneeling, coughing with difficulty. But it wasn't an ordinary cough. It was something deep, painful that seemed to tear through his chest. Mike ran to him, helping him sit on the sofa. "Dad, what is it? What happened?" he asked, desperate. The father tried to respond, but another wave of coughing interrupted him. When it finally stopped, he was pale, cold, sweating, breathing with difficulty. "I'm fine. Just a cough," the father tried to minimize, but Mike didn't believe it. Something was wrong, very wrong. "We're going to the hospital now," Mike ordered, leaving no room for discussion. The father tried to protest, but had no strength. Mike helped him get up, got the boy who had just arrived from school, and the three rushed to the car. "Everything will be fine. Everything will be fine," Mike repeated like a mantra, but his heart said otherwise. At the hospital, they went straight to the emergency room. Mike explained the symptoms, and soon the father was taken for tests. Many tests: X-rays, CT scans, laboratory tests. Mike and the boy stayed in the waiting room again, that cursed place that Mike had begun to hate. Every minute was torture. Every second without news was a year of anguish. The boy was pale, frightened, clinging to Mike's arm as if this could somehow protect them from what was coming. Finally, after hours, the doctor called Mike for a conversation. He asked the boy to wait, and Mike knew they were bad news. Very bad. They went to that same small room without windows, and Mike felt a terrifying déjà vu. "The tests showed something concerning," the doctor began, and Mike felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Your father has lung cancer. It's in a very advanced stage," the doctor continued, and each word was a death sentence. Mike shook his head, refusing to accept. "But he was fine. He was getting better. How can he have cancer?" he questioned, his voice rising. "Cancer can develop silently for a long time. Considering his history of living on the streets without adequate medical care, it's likely that it had been there for years," the doctor explained with regret. "How long?" Mike asked, and his voice came out so weak that he himself barely recognized it. The doctor hesitated, and in that hesitation, Mike already knew the answer. "Maybe weeks. A month at most." "I'm sorry," the doctor replied, and those words destroyed Mike's world. He felt as if someone had ripped his heart out of his chest and trampled on it. "No, it can't be. We just found each other again. We just started to be a family." "It can't end now," Mike pleaded, and he didn't care about appearing desperate. "There has to be some treatment. Chemotherapy, surgery, anything," he continued, grabbing the doctor's arm. The man looked at him with genuine compassion. "The cancer is too advanced. Any aggressive treatment at this stage would only cause more suffering without changing the final outcome. The best thing we can do now is keep him comfortable and pain-free. We can provide medications to control symptoms and palliative care," the doctor explained, and Mike fell apart. He collapsed into the chair, buried his face in his hands, and cried. He cried for the injustice of it all, for the cruelty of fate that finally brought them together, only to tear them apart again. Why? Why now? He asked the universe, but received no answer. Mike returned to his father's room with red, swollen eyes. His father was lying in bed, pale but awake, and by the look in his eyes, Mike knew he already knew. "They told you," Mike said, and it wasn't a question. His father nodded slowly. "I already suspected it. The cough, the fatigue, the chest pain. I knew something was wrong," his father admitted, and his voice was calm, resigned. "How can you be so calm? You're going to... Mike couldn't finish the sentence. His father extended his hand and Mike held it, squeezing tightly as if that could keep him there. "I had more than I deserved, son. I had these weeks with you. I had the chance to see you again, to ask for forgiveness, to be forgiven. I had the chance to be a father, even if for a short time. I died 30 years ago when your mother left. Everything since then has been borrowed time. And these last few weeks have been the happiest of my life," his father explained, and there was a peace in his words that Mike couldn't understand. "But I'm not ready to lose you again. I just found you," Mike pleaded, tears falling freely. "Then let's make the most of the time we have. Let's make each day count for years," his father proposed, squeezing Mike's hand with tenderness. Mike took his father back home. He didn't want his father to spend his last days in a cold, impersonal hospital. He wanted it to be at home, surrounded by love and warmth. The days that followed were the most precious and the most painful of Mike's life. They spent all their time together. They talked about everything and nothing. His father told stories of his youth, of when he was young and full of dreams. Mike shared his fears, his hopes, his regrets. They laughed at silly memories and cried together over lost opportunities. The boy was always there, reading to his father when he was too tired to hold a book, making drawings they hung on the wall, bringing small joys to increasingly difficult days. His father weakened each day. He became paler, more tired, slept more and more, but when he was awake, he always had a smile for them. "I had a good life in the end," he would always say, and Mike wanted to believe that. They looked at old photos together, rebuilding memories, creating new ones. "Your mother would be so happy to see you like this," his father said one night, holding her photo with trembling hands. "She always wanted you to be happy." "And you are, aren't you?" he asked, looking at Mike. Mike nodded, tears falling. "I am, because of you," he replied. The weeks passed too quickly, as they always do when you want them to last forever. His father grew weaker and weaker, confined to bed, barely able to stay awake for more than a few hours. But he fought. He fought with all the strength he had left because he wanted every extra second with his family. Mike and the boy took turns caring for him, making sure he was not in pain, that he was comfortable, that he knew he was loved. One night, under the soft light of a lamp, his father called them both close. Mike and the boy knelt beside the bed, each holding one of his hands. His father looked at them both with love so deep it was almost tangible. "Thank you," he whispered, barely able to speak. "Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for giving me these weeks. Thank you for letting me be a father again, even if for such a short time," he said, looking at Mike with tears in his eyes. "I was happy, happier than I deserved. And now I can go in peace," he continued, his voice growing weaker and weaker. Mike squeezed his father's hand tightly, as if that could keep him there. "I love you, Dad. I always loved you, even when I didn't want to admit it," Mike confessed, his voice broken by sobs. "I know, and I love you too, my son. Always have. Always will," his father replied. "Now I can go see your mother. I can finally rest knowing that you'll be okay. That you two will be okay together," his father said, looking from his son to the boy. "Take care of each other. Be family. Be happy for me," he asked, and a small but genuine smile appeared on his lips. "Thank you for forgiving me. Now I can go in peace to see your mother," his father whispered, and those were his last words. His eyes closed gently, his breathing slowed and then stopped. Just like that, surrounded by love, Mike's father passed away. Mike and the boy stayed there, holding his hands, crying together, united in grief but also in the love they felt for the man who had changed their lives. "He's gone," the boy said between sobs, and Mike pulled him into a tight hug. "But he was happy, and we'll honor that. We'll live well for him," Mike promised, and in that moment made a silent promise that he would never leave that boy alone. What the father that the old man had tried to be at the end would mean to him. "We're going to be okay together," Mike said, and the boy nodded against his chest. The funeral was simple, without many people, but full of meaning. Mike stood by the grave, watching the coffin being lowered into the earth, feeling an immense emptiness inside him, but also a gratitude he hadn't expected to feel. The boy was by his side, holding his hand tightly, crying silently. "I forgave you, Father," Mike said out loud, not caring who might hear. "And I'm grateful for that because it freed me, because it allowed me to really know you before you left. But we didn't have enough time. We had just a few weeks together after 30 years apart," he continued, his voice breaking. "If I had looked for you sooner, we would have had more time. We could have built more memories. But I was so stuck in anger that I wasted the present," Mike lamented, feeling remorse crushing his chest. But then he felt the boy squeeze his hand, and he looked down. The boy was looking at him with those eyes too wise for his age. "He died happy," the boy said softly. "You gave him that, you forgave him, you let him go in peace. He told me before he died that these were the happiest weeks he had in 30 years, the boy explained, and those words brought a small but real comfort to Mike. Maybe they hadn't had much time. Maybe it had been too late. But they had had those weeks, and in those weeks they had found forgiveness, love, and peace, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. One week after the funeral, Mike was sitting in his truck cab, parked in the same place where everything had begun. The road stretched ahead, empty and silent, waiting for him as it always did. But this time it was different. He wasn't alone. The boy was sitting in the passenger seat, looking out the window with an expression that Mike knew all too well. It was the expression of someone who didn't know where to go, of someone who was used to being left behind. The silence inside the cab was heavy, loaded with unasked questions and decisions not yet made. Mike held the steering wheel with his hands, but the engine was off. He didn't know where to go. He didn't know what to do. For the first time in a long time, the road had no answers for him. And now, Mike thought, looking at the boy out of the corner of his eye. What do I do with you? He wondered, and the question weighed like lead in his chest. He knew he needed to make a decision, but he was afraid. Afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of not being good enough, afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past. The boy finally broke the silence, his voice coming out small and hesitant. I can go back to the street. I know how to get by. I understand if you don't want to stay with me, he said, looking at his own hands in his lap, avoiding Mike's eyes. Those words hit Mike like a punch to the stomach. He turned completely to the boy and really looked at him. He saw the sadness in those childish eyes, the fear of being abandoned again, the resignation of someone who had already learned not to expect anything from anyone. And in that moment, Mike saw himself. He saw the 8-year-old boy he had been, alone and scared, waiting for someone who never came back. He saw all the nights he spent in shelters, all the times he was passed from family to family, all the times he built walls around his heart to avoid getting hurt again. No, Mike said firmly, and his voice came out stronger than he expected. The boy looked at him with surprise. You're not going anywhere, you're staying with me. Mike remembered his father's words in the hospital, asking him to take care of the boy, to be the father he couldn't be. And Mike realized it wasn't just for his father. It was for himself too. It was his chance to break the cycle, to do things differently, to not let another child grow up alone and full of anger. The boy's eyes widened, tears beginning to form. Really? He asked, his voice trembling with hope and fear mixed together. Mike nodded, and for the first time in days, a small smile appeared on his face. Really. But it won't be just like that anyway. We're going to do this right, Mike explained, taking his cell phone from his pocket. He had researched during the week, had talked to social workers, had understood the process. It wouldn't be easy, but he was determined. We're going to start the adoption process, or guardianship as they call it. There will be bureaucracy, paperwork, interviews, but I'm going to do everything right, Mike promised, looking directly into the boy's eyes. You're going to be my son, officially, with papers, documents, everything proper. You won't be just another child without a name, without a family. You're going to have a last name, a home, a family, he continued, and saw tears falling freely down the boy's face. Why? The boy asked, his voice barely coming out. Why would you do this for me? He questioned, as if he couldn't believe someone actually cared. Mike put his hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing gently. Because you deserve it. Because every child deserves to have someone. And because I don't want you to grow up alone like I did. Now you have a family. We are a family, Mike replied, and the boy threw himself into his arms, crying with relief and happiness. The following months were a mixture of challenges and joys. Mike dove headfirst into the adoption process, filling out endless forms, attending interviews, proving he had the means to care for a child. He changed his work routine, accepting only deliveries that would allow him to return regularly, reorganizing his entire life around this new responsibility. There were moments of frustration when the bureaucracy seemed impossible to navigate, when social workers asked difficult questions about his past, about his ability to be a father. But Mike didn't give up. He fought with a determination he didn't know he had, because now he had a purpose greater than himself. And finally, after months of waiting and paperwork, the process was approved. On the day the judge signed the official papers, Mike and the boy were sitting side by side in the courtroom, dressed in clothes that Mike had bought especially for the occasion. When the judge announced that the adoption was complete, that they were now officially father and son, the boy cried, and so did Mike. You're going to be my son. Forever. Officially, Mike said, hugging the boy tightly. Really? The boy asked again, as if he still couldn't believe it. Really, now you have a family, Mike confirmed, and felt something heal inside him in that moment. Life took on a new routine, different from anything Mike had known. The boy now traveled with him in the truck, sitting in the passenger seat that was always empty before. They traversed the roads together, talking about everything and nothing, laughing at silly jokes, listening to old songs on the radio. Mike taught the boy to read maps, showing him how to plan routes, how to calculate distances. He taught basic mechanics, how to change a tire, how to check the oil, how to take care of the truck. Sometimes on empty and safe roads, he even let the boy hold the steering wheel for a few seconds, just to feel what it was like, and they would both laugh when the truck zigzagged slightly. "One day you'll have your own driver's license," Mike promised, and the boy would smile with eyes shining with expectation. But Mike also knew that education was important. He had enrolled the boy in a school, and when he needed to make longer trips, they would video call with the teachers. The boy would do his homework in the truck, using the dashboard as an improvised desk, and Mike would help as best he could, relearning things he had forgotten decades ago. "Math was easier in my day," Mike would jokingly complain, and the boy would laugh, explaining the new methods he was learning in school. They created rituals, small traditions that were just theirs. Every week, no matter where they were, they would stop at a different diner and try something new. They discovered places together, small towns, forgotten tourist spots, beautiful landscapes hidden along the roads. Mike wasn't just working anymore, just surviving. He was living, really living, for the first time in decades, and the best part was that he wasn't alone anymore. He had purpose now. He had a reason to wake up every morning, to make coffee, to plan the day. He was a father, and he was determined to be the best father he could be, to break the cycle of abandonment that had defined his life for so long. "You know, Grandpa Richard would be proud of you," the boy said one afternoon as they drove down a road surrounded by trees. Mike looked at him with surprise. "Why?" he asked, curious. "Because you did what he always wanted to do. You stayed. You didn't leave. You chose to be a father," the boy explained. And those words touched Mike deeply. "He taught me something important," Mike replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "He taught me that it's never too late to start over. That it's never too late to do the right thing," he continued, and felt gratitude for his father despite all the suffering. They visited the grave regularly whenever they passed near the town. They would bring flowers, clean the headstone, stay there for a few minutes in respectful silence. But it wasn't a sad silence, it was a silence of peace. "Look, Dad," Mike would say out loud, as if his father could hear him. "He got good grades in school this month. You would be proud," he would say, sharing the boy's achievements. The boy also spoke, telling stories about their travels, about the new things he was learning, about how happy he was. "He said you were a good man," the boy said once, kneeling beside the grave. "He was right. You are the best father I could have had," he continued, looking at Mike with love and gratitude. Those visits weren't about pain or loss. They were about memory, about honoring the man who had changed both their lives, even if for such a short time. They were about maintaining the connection with someone who, in the end, had taught them both the true meaning of family. Months turned into a year and life went on. Mike and the boy became an inseparable duo. The truck was no longer just a workplace, it was a home on wheels. They had their favorite songs, their preferred snacks, their mandatory stops. The boy grew taller, more confident, happier. The marks of the street and abandonment were still there, probably always would be, but now they were just scars, no longer open wounds. He had a family. He had a father who woke up early to make coffee, who checked his homework, who asked about his day, who cared. And Mike, for the first time in his life, didn't feel alone, didn't feel lost. He had found his place in the world, and it was beside that boy whom destiny had placed in his path. "You know," Mike said one morning, as they drove down an open, sunny road, "I spent my whole life thinking I was alone against the world. But I was wrong. I was just waiting to find you," he confessed, and the boy smiled, that wide and genuine smile that was now so common. "I was waiting for you too," the boy replied, and those simple words carried a universe of meaning. It was an ordinary afternoon when the boy asked the question. They were stopped at a crossroads, deciding which way to go. The boy looked at the road ahead, then at Mike, and asked, "Where do we go now?" Mike looked at him. then at the road that stretched endlessly ahead, full of possibilities, unknown destinations, adventures waiting to happen. And for the first time in his life, uncertainty didn't frighten him. Because no matter where the road took them, they would go together. "Wherever the road takes us," Mike answered with a smile. "But now we go together," he added, and shifted into gear. The truck moved forward on the road, leaving behind the past of pain and loneliness, heading toward a future that was uncertain but full of hope. The sun shone on the horizon, painting the sky in warm colors, and inside the truck cab, father and son laughed at something silly that had played on the radio. There, in that simple but perfect moment, everything made sense. Mike had lost his father after just a few weeks together, but he had gained a son, and in the process he had gained himself back. He had learned to forgive, to love, to start over. Because it's never too late to forgive. And it's never too late to love. And so in the unpredictable curves of life, a new family was born, not perfect, not traditional, but real. And it was all they needed. If Mike, Richard, and Matthew's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.